The ancient Greek historian Herodotus called Egypt the gift of the Nile. And really, without the Nile River, there wouldn't be any Egypt at all. This is the Putatuck River behind me. The Nile River in Egypt is a lot bigger. This is the Housatonic River. It's a lot bigger, isn't it? But it's not nearly as big as the Nile. The Housatonic is only 149 miles from start to finish, and you can clearly see the other side. The Nile River is more than 4,000 miles long, and at its widest is 1.5 miles. That's 26.5 swim tests. The Nile River flows north through the desert, and the only place any plants can grow are close to the banks. It's basically a very long, very narrow desert oasis. People have lived on the banks of the Nile since the Stone Age, and all the ancient Egyptian cities and temples were located there. It was the lifeblood of Egypt, in more ways than one. It hardly ever rains in Egypt, but once a year the Nile floods its banks, depositing rich fertilizer. This allowed the ancient Egyptians to grow everything they needed: wheat, vegetables, fruits, even cotton and flax to use for clothes. They went hunting and fishing in the marshes along the banks. They used the reeds to make mats or baskets, or pounded them flat to make papyrus to write on. It was even the main source of transportation for ancient Egypt. The current flowed south to north, but the prevailing winds were usually north to south. So if you wanted to go south, you just put up your sail. If you wanted to go north, you just took down the sail and floated with the current. Most houses and temples were right on the river or close to it, so you never had to carry anything from the boat very far. In fact, sailing on the Nile hasn't changed very much in over 5,000 years. And trust me, the Egyptians knew how lucky they were. They even had a god just of the Nile. Happy was the name of the god at the annual flooding of the Nile, because that was what allowed the Egyptians to grow crops. He was a very important god. He was usually shown with either blue or green skin. One of his titles was Lord of the River Bringing Vegetation. His priests carefully monitored the water level in the Nile and kept records of all of the floods. Too much flooding would, of course, wash away all the plants and some of the people and maybe animals, and not enough flooding, unfortunately, and things would die out. The annual flooding of the Nile River controlled Egyptian life for close to 6,000 years, until the 1960s, when the river was finally dammed at Aswan. After that point, it's been the Egyptians who have been controlling the Nile River.